I've been digging graves for 11 years, and I've never once been afraid of the dead. It was the living that always made me nervous. The grieving widows who grabbed my wrist too hard when I lowered the casket. The children who stared at the dirt like they expected it to move. The old men who laughed at the wrong moments because there was nothing else left to do. The living were unpredictable. The living could surprise you. The dead, I always thought, just stayed where you put them. I was wrong about that. I've been wrong about a lot of things. If you're new here, if this is the first story you're stumbling across on this channel, I want you to know that what I'm about to tell you is not fiction. I'm not a writer. I'm not an entertainer. I'm a man who spent the better part of a decade working in a place where the boundary between this world and whatever comes after it is thin as tissue paper, and something reached through that paper and touched me. And I've been trying ever since to understand what it was. If you like stories like this, real ones told by people who actually lived them, consider subscribing. This channel is new. We upload long stories like this every single day. No jump scares, no special effects. Just voices in the dark telling the truth. Now let me tell you about Harrow Hill Cemetery. And about Plot 37. And about the thing that should have stayed in the ground. My name is Caleb Marsh. I'm 39 years old. I live alone in a rented house in a small town in rural western Pennsylvania that I'm deliberately not going to name, because some of the people involved in this story still live in that town, and I have no interest in bringing anything back down on them. If you're from this part of the state, you might recognize the details anyway. The old highway. The collapsed water tower. The church with the missing steeple. You'll know the cemetery. I started working at Harrow Hill when I was 28. Fresh out of a bad divorce, a worse job, and 6 months of living on a friend's couch trying to figure out what to do next. I wasn't trained for anything particular. I'd done construction, I'd done warehouse work, I'd driven a truck for a while. I was good with my hands and my back was still holding up and I needed something steady. The posting was in the back of the local paper. Cemetery groundskeeper and maintenance, full-time, housing included. That last part was what sold me. The job came with a small caretaker's cottage at the north edge of the property. 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, a bathroom that smelled like rust. But it was mine, and it was free, and at that point in my life that felt like winning the lottery. I called the number. A man named Gerald Fitch answered. He was the cemetery's administrator, a thin, precise man in his late 60s who wore the same brown cardigan every time I ever saw him, regardless of the weather. He interviewed me over the phone for about 4 minutes, asked me 2 questions, and hired me. The first question was, "Do you have any superstitions?" I said no. The second question was, "Are you comfortable working alone at night?" I said yes. Those were the right answers apparently. I drove out the following Monday to look at the place before I officially started. It was late October, which I now understand was probably not the most neutral emotional context for a first visit. The trees were stripped bare. The sky was the color of old pewter. The fields on either side of the access road had been harvested weeks ago and stood in ragged brown rows that disappeared into the mist. Harrow Hill Cemetery sat at the end of a narrow gravel road about 3 miles from the nearest paved highway. It covered roughly 40 acres of gently sloping land on the eastern face of a low hill, hence the name I assumed, though I later learned that harrow was also an old farming implement, a spiked frame dragged through soil to break up clods and clear debris. The kind of tool that tore the earth open and left it ready to receive seed. Or something else. The cemetery was old. Established in 1843, according to the stone arch over the main entrance. Some of the markers in the back sections dated from even earlier than that. Rough fieldstones with names so worn by weather that you couldn't read them anymore, just faint suggestions of letters, like words trying to surface from deep water. The front sections were newer. Polished granite, well-maintained, fresh flowers on some of the plots. A few veteran sections with their government-issue headstones standing in strict military rows. A children's section, which I always found harder to look at than the adult graves, even after all the time I spent there. The back sections were something different. The back sections were where the hill got steeper and the trees got closer and the light seemed to arrive late and leave early, like it was always just slightly reluctant to commit. Back there, the headstones were older and more irregular. Limestone and sandstone markers that had sunk unevenly into the soil over the decades, tilting at angles that gave the whole section a slightly crooked, fever dream quality. Like looking at a reflection in water that someone had just disturbed. There was no neighboring property directly visible from back there. Just the tree line, black and dense, and beyond it the suggestion of more hills, and beyond that the sky. Gerald Fitch walked me around the property that first morning. He had a clipboard and a set of keys and he walked with a slight limp that he never explained. He showed me the maintenance shed, the equipment, the water lines, the drainage problem in the southeast corner that had been a drainage problem since, probably before either of us were born. He showed me the cottage and explained the heating situation, which was complicated. He was professional and courteous and almost entirely without effect, in the way that people who have worked around death for a long time sometimes become. But there was one thing he said that I came back to later, in the dark, more times than I can count. We were standing at the edge of the old section, the back section, and he was pointing out the property line with his clipboard, explaining where the groundwater tended to pool in heavy rain, when he stopped mid-sentence and looked at the graves around us for a moment. "There's one plot back here," he said, "that I want you to leave alone." I asked which one. He pointed. Not far from where we were standing, slightly uphill, sitting between a weathered limestone marker and a rusted iron cross, there was a grave. The stone was granite, darker than the surrounding markers, almost black when the cloud shadow passed over it. The name on it was partially visible from where we stood, but at that distance I couldn't make it out. "Plot 37, he said. "The ground settles there sometimes. The stone shifts. I don't want you messing with it." I said that was fine. He looked at me for a moment in that flat, appraising way he had, and then he said, "I mean it, Caleb. Leave that one alone." I'd been hired 4 minutes after a 4-minute phone call, and I hadn't yet earned the right to ask questions. So I nodded and said yes sir, and we moved on. For the first 3 months, everything was completely normal. I want to be clear about that. I want to establish a baseline before I start telling you about the other things, because I think it's important that you understand I'm not a man who jumps at shadows or mistakes a tree branch for something sinister. I'm practical. I'm physical. I spent 11 years working in one of the most morbid settings imaginable, and for the first decade of that work, it was just a job. I mowed grass. I raked leaves. I trimmed around headstones with a weed eater. I dug graves with the backhoe and occasionally by hand when the backhoe couldn't fit or the ground was soft enough to work. I planted seasonal flowers in the memorial garden. I maintained the drainage system. I reset sunken markers and touched up the grout on the older stone borders and occasionally cleared away the detritus that grieving people sometimes left behind, deflated balloons, waterlogged greeting cards, stuffed animals slowly dissolving in the rain. In the evenings, I lived in my small cottage and read and watched television on a tiny set I'd propped on a stack of old phone books and called my sister in Ohio every Sunday and generally led the most unremarkable existence imaginable. It was quiet. It was stable. It was, honestly, exactly what I needed after the chaos of the preceding years. The cemetery was quiet at night. That sounds obvious, but I mean it in a specific sensory way. There was an active quality to the silence there that took some getting used to, the way sound seemed to get absorbed differently among the headstones, the way the wind behaved oddly when it moved through the old section, deflecting and channeling between the markers so that sometimes it sounded like voices just at the threshold of audibility. Low murmuring sounds that always resolved into wind when you paid attention to them, but that required the act of paying attention. I learned to not pay attention. I learned to hear the cemetery the way you learn to hear traffic when you live near a highway, as ambient background, present but unregistered. For those first 3 months that was fine. Then the winter came in hard, and the ground froze to a depth I hadn't seen in years, and something woke up. Or maybe something was always awake. Maybe I just hadn't been listening closely enough. The cold that year was extraordinary. By mid-November the ground was frozen solid to a depth of 18 inches, which created practical problems for the cemetery business. Deaths don't pause for weather, and neither do the expectations of bereaved families. I spent a significant amount of that November trying to manage the delicate logistics of winter interments. The heaters we used to thaw the ground before digging, the risk of backhoe damage to adjacent plots, the way frozen soil behaves differently than unfrozen soil when it's excavated and then returned. It was on one of those thaw and dig operations, a Tuesday in late November, that I first noticed something wrong with plot 37. I wasn't working near it. I was 3 rows over, preparing a plot for a burial scheduled the following Thursday. I had the propane heater set up and running, and I was drinking coffee from a thermos and watching the frost steam off the ground, and something made me look up. I don't know what made me look up. There wasn't a sound that I registered consciously. No movement in my peripheral vision. I just looked up the way you sometimes do when you feel eyes on you. Plot 37 was about 60 feet away. The ground around the marker was disturbed. Not dramatically so. Not like something had been digging there or like there had been a cave-in. But the surface of the soil, which should have been frozen solid just like everywhere else in that section, looked soft, churned almost, like the ground had been turned over recently. I stood up and walked over to look at it more closely. Up close, the disturbance was undeniable. The earth around the base of the dark granite marker had been pushed up from below. Small ridges and wrinkles in the soil, like the kind of surface distortion you see when tree roots are pushing up from underneath. The grass that covered the rest of the plot was still there, but in a rough ring around the stone, the soil had buckled. I crouched down and pressed my hand against it. It was warm. Not dramatically warm. Not burning. Just warmer than the surrounding ground. Warmer than frozen earth in late November had any right to be. I pulled my hand back. I stood up. I walked back to my heater and my coffee and my grave preparation, and I told myself it was nothing. Settlement. Decomposition generates heat. It's a biological fact, and I'd known that for years. Gas pockets, shifting substrates, the complicated chemistry of what happens beneath the ground when a body breaks down. There were a dozen rational explanations for what I'd observed. I cataloged them carefully and I went back to work, and I didn't look at plot 37 again that afternoon. But that night, lying in my cottage, I kept thinking about the warmth against my palm. And I kept thinking about what Gerald Fitch had said. Leave that one alone. I didn't ask him about it the next time I saw him. That's one of the things I regret. I don't know if it would have changed anything, but I think about the questions I didn't ask. There were a lot of them. The second thing that happened was about 2 weeks later. It was a Thursday evening just after 4 o'clock, which at that time of year meant it was already nearly dark. I was doing my last walk of the day, a circuit of the property I tried to do each evening to check for anything that needed attention. Vandalism, windfall branches, flowers that had blown off of graves, that kind of thing. I was in the old section, moving along the row above plot 37, when I heard it. A sound from underground. I stopped walking. The sound was faint, barely there. But in the extraordinary quiet of that cemetery in winter, with the trees bare and the wind low and no other human beings within a mile of me, it was unmistakable. A dry, papery sound. Irregular. Like something shifting. Like something scratching. I stood very still for a long time. The sound stopped. I told myself, gasp. Settling. The complicated mechanical processes of decomposition producing vibration. I had read about this. I knew it was a real phenomenon. I went back to the cottage and I locked the door behind me, which was not something I usually did, and I sat at the kitchen table and thought about whether I was going to say anything to Gerald Fitch. I decided not to. I'd been at Harrow Hill for less than 3 months. I didn't want to seem like I was already coming apart at the seams. I'd tell him there was a settlement issue at plot 37 and he'd already told me to leave it alone, and that would be the end of it. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning I did something I've thought about a lot since. I walked out to plot 37 in the gray early morning light, and I stood in front of the headstone and I read the name on it for the first time. Elias Vore. Born 1891. Died 1943. And beneath that, carved deeply into the dark granite, a phrase I didn't recognize as Latin at the time but later had translated. Nemo me impune laces sit. No one touches me with impunity. I read that 3 times. Then I went and had breakfast. I want to be clear that I'm not a superstitious person. I'm not religious in any traditional sense. I don't believe in ghosts, or at least I didn't used to believe in them, which is a distinction that matters quite a lot when you're telling a story like this. But I am curious. I've always been curious. When something catches my attention, I tend to pull on the thread until I understand what I've found. It's gotten me in trouble before. So over the following weeks, partly to occupy myself during the long quiet evenings and partly because I couldn't stop thinking about that inscription, I started looking into the history of Harrow Hill Cemetery. The cemetery kept its own records. Gerald had shown me the filing room in the administrative office, a small closet-sized space off the main office crammed with ledgers and folders going back to the 1840s. Everything was documented. The name of the deceased, the date of interment, the plot number, the name of next of kin. The entry for plot 37 was brief. Vore Elias Cornelius. Mel. Born February 14, 1891. Died November 4, 1943. Cause of death listed as cardiac arrest. Next of kin, none listed. Payment for perpetual care, made in full by a third party. Notes, restricted. That last word, restricted, was written in red ink. In a ledger where everything else was written in black. I looked for more and I found it in fragments. There was a local history book in the county library, self-published in the 1970s by a retired schoolteacher named Dorothy Haas, covering the history of the area from settlement through the post-war years. It had a chapter on notable local figures, and Elias Vore appeared in it. The account was brief and oddly nervous in tone, as if Ms. Haas had included it reluctantly, which I found significant. She described Vore as a figure of considerable notoriety, in the county during the 1920s and 1930s. He'd come from somewhere back east, exactly where was unclear. He'd settled on a property outside of town and had lived there alone for 20 years, during which time he had been the subject of persistent rumors and at least twice formal complaints to the sheriff's office. The nature of the complaints was not specified in the book. What Haas did right was that Vore had been reputed to engage in practices that the community found troubling, and that he had few friends and many enemies, and that his death in 1943 had been met with relief in many quarters. She noted, almost in passing, that 3 people who had publicly antagonized Vore during his lifetime had died within months of doing so, and that the county coroner had investigated each death and found no evidence of foul play in any case. I sat with that for a while. There was one more thing I found, and this one I found by accident. I was cleaning out a storage cabinet in the maintenance shed, looking for a specific replacement part for the backhoe's hydraulic system, and I found, behind a rusted box of hex bolts, a tin coffee can. Inside the can was a folded piece of paper, brittle with age, the folds cracking as I opened it. It was a note. Handwritten in the shaky script of an old person, or someone writing in a state of agitation. It said, "The man in 37 is not to be disturbed. Not under any circumstances. Not if the stone sinks. Not if the ground settles. Not if you think you hear something. Especially not if you think you hear something. I am saying this as clearly as I know how. Whatever happens at that plot, you walk away from it. This is not something I can explain. Some things don't have explanations. Just walk away. HM. P.S. If you find this note because something has already started, then God help you because I couldn't." No date. No further identification beyond the initials. I kept the note. I still have it. I didn't show it to Gerald Fitch. I should have. January was the worst month, and not because of anything supernatural. There were 3 burials in the first 2 weeks, including one that required digging in a section of the old cemetery where the ground was so compacted and rocky that I had to spend 4 hours breaking through by hand after the backhoe reached its limits. My back was screaming. My hands were raw. I was surviving on instant coffee and sandwiches I made in the morning and forgot to eat until mid-afternoon. And I wasn't sleeping well. It had started subtly. I'd wake up at 2-3 in the morning with the strong impression that I'd heard something, but by the time I was fully conscious there would be nothing. Just the wind, the creak of the cottage settling in the cold, the distant sound of the highway. But the impression persisted. The feeling that I had been woken by a specific sound, not a random noise but something intentional. Something that wanted to be heard. I started keeping a flashlight on the nightstand. The first night I actually got up and went outside was a Saturday in mid-January, about 3 weeks after I'd found the note in the coffee can. It was after 2 in the morning and I'd woken for the 3rd consecutive night with that same jolted alert feeling, heart pounding for no good reason, and this time I was angry enough about it to get out of bed. I put on my work boots and my coat and I grabbed the flashlight and I went outside. The cemetery at 2 in the morning in January is a particular kind of quiet. The cold had laid a thin layer of snow over everything, not deep, just a dusting like powdered sugar on a dark tablecloth, and it made the grounds look almost luminous under the quarter moon. The headstones threw long shadows across the white ground and everything was absolutely still. I stood on the cottage porch for a minute and watched and listened. Nothing. I went back inside. Métis sat at the kitchen table. And then I heard it, coming from outside, from the direction of the old section. The sound was clearer this time, unmistakable in the quiet. Scratching. Dry, persistent, patient. Like something working at a confined space, testing it. I sat at the kitchen table for a long moment. I want to tell you I was terrified. In retrospect I was terrified. But in the moment, what I felt was mostly that stubborn, contrary anger that has gotten me in trouble throughout my life. I was 31 years old and I had a rational mind and a decent flashlight, and I was tired of being woken up in the middle of the night by something I didn't understand. I went back outside. I walked out into the cemetery. The sound was coming from plot 37. I knew it even before I reached it. I could track the direction by the quiet itself, the way it seemed to radiate outward from one specific point in the old section, a stillness that had weight to it. I walked between the headstones toward it, my flashlight cutting a pale beam through the dark, and the scratching grew clearer with every step. Not louder, the volume was more or less constant, but clearer, more defined. Like the better I could hear it, the more precisely I could identify what it was. When I was 10 feet from plot 37, it stopped. I stood in the dark with my flashlight aimed at the grave and I waited. The ground was undisturbed, no sign of the churning I'd seen in November. The snow lay smooth and unbroken over the plot. The dark granite headstone stood exactly where it always had. Elias 4. Nemo me impune laces sit. I waited for 5 minutes. I went back to bed. But I lay awake until 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, running through explanations. Guess. Animals. Frostive. The mechanical mystery of what happens underground over decades. The thing about all those explanations is that they were adequate. Adequate isn't the same as convincing. In February the lights started. I'm talking about the maintenance lights, the small solar-powered marker lights we kept on the pathways through the old section, the kind that charged during the day and provided dim amber illumination through the night for the rare nocturnal visitor. Families sometimes came late after work to visit graves. We kept the path lights for them. The lights in the row nearest plot 37 began failing. Not all at once. One at a time over the course of about 10 days. They'd go out at night and be back on in the morning, which was consistent with a battery or charging issue. But when I checked them, they were fine. The panels were clear, the batteries were holding charge, the connections were clean. I replaced 3 of them anyway and they still failed. And not just failed, they did something else that I couldn't explain and still can't explain. They flickered. In a pattern. I noticed it on a Tuesday night when I happened to be looking out the cottage window toward the old section around 10 o'clock. The 3 lights on the path nearest plot 37 were flickering in sequence. 1, 2, 3. Then a pause. Then 1, 2, 3 again. I watched it for several minutes. It wasn't random. It was too regular to be random. But it wasn't Morse code or any other pattern I recognized. It was just 1, 2, 3. A rhythm. Like something tapping. Like something counting. I went out the next morning and pulled all 3 fixtures and checked them again. Nothing wrong. I put them back. They were fine all through that day and the following night. Then on Thursday they flickered again. By this point I was starting to talk to myself while I worked, which was a habit I'd never had before. Just low, constant narration. What I was doing, what I was going to do next, what I needed from the supply shed. I didn't think about why I was doing it until one afternoon I caught myself and realized I was trying to fill the silence. I was actively, anxiously unable to let the silence of the cemetery be quiet. I called Gerald Fitch that Friday and told him the lights in the old section were having intermittent problems. He said he'd look into it. He never came out to look. I didn't push it. Instead, I made a decision that I thought was rational and controlled but was actually, I understand now, a form of magical thinking. I decided that I would conduct a systematic check of plot 37, just a visual assessment, no touching, no digging, just a careful look at the plot in good daylight with a clear head, and either confirm that there was a physical explanation for the settlement and the warmth or confirm that there wasn't, and either way I would have information to work from. So on a clear cold morning in mid-February I walked out to plot 37 with a notebook and a flashlight and a soil thermometer I'd borrowed from the maintenance shed, the kind used to check ground temperatures for spring planting calculations. I looked at the grave carefully. The ground showed recent settlement, more significant than what I'd seen in November. The soil around the base of the headstone had subsided by what I estimated was 2 to 3 inches, leaving a visible depression. This was not unprecedented in old cemeteries. Coffins decompose, the ground above them subsides. But the depression was unusually concentrated. Unusually neat. A perfect oval of sunken ground, centered on the headstone. I pushed the soil thermometer into the ground at the edge of the depression. I waited. The reading was 61 degrees Fahrenheit. The ambient air temperature was 28 degrees. The ground temperature at a depth of 6 inches in February in Pennsylvania should be somewhere between 30 and 40 degrees. 61 degrees. I pulled the thermometer out and pushed it into the ground 3 feet away in a neutral spot. 33 degrees. I pushed it back into the depression at plot 37. 61. I stood up. Wrote the numbers in my notebook. Stood there in the cold morning air and looked at the dark stone and thought, there is a physical explanation for this. I just don't know what it is. Then I went back to the cottage and drank about half a pot of coffee and called my sister in Ohio and talked to her about nothing for 45 minutes because I needed to hear a human voice. That evening, I googled Nemo me impune laces sit. No one touches me with impunity. It's the motto of Scotland. It's also the motto of a specific order, the Order of the Thistle. And it appears in an Edgar Allan Poe story, The Cask of Amontillado, as the motto of a family that takes revenge on those who wrong them. I stared at that search result for a while. Then I turned my laptop off and went to bed. I did not sleep. The first time I saw it was a Saturday night in late February. I'd been in bed since 10, which for me at that point meant lying awake in the dark thinking about plot 37 while pretending to be asleep. I'd given up on actually sleeping sometime around the second week of February and had settled for a kind of horizontal rest. eyes closed, body still, mind churning. At approximately 11:30 p.m., I heard the scratching again. Clearer than it had ever been before. Not faint. Not a sound at the edge of perception that I could rationalize away. Loud enough that I felt it in my chest. A dry, insistent rhythm coming from outside, from the direction of the old section, from specifically the direction of plot 37. I lay still for a moment. Then I got up and went to the window. The cottage window faced south, toward the central sections of the cemetery. From it I could see the main path and several rows of headstones, and at the far end of the visible area, the beginning of the old section. The path lights were on, 3 of them, the 3 nearest to plot 37. They were not flickering. They were dimmer than they should have been. All 3 of them significantly dimmer than the others. As if whatever was drawing power somewhere was drawing it from those 3 lights specifically. And there was something standing between the headstones. I almost missed it. I was looking at the lights, trying to understand the dimming, and my eye swept past it before my brain registered what it was seeing. A figure. Standing in the row of graves adjacent to plot 37. Just standing there, very still, in the space between 2 headstones. Human in shape. Upright, roughly 6 feet tall, 2 arms, a head. Dark. Not pitch black, not a silhouette exactly, but dark in the way that shadows are dark when they coalesce into a form. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't move. I'm a practical man. My first instinct was, someone is in the cemetery. Kids maybe. Teenagers who'd climbed the fence for some reason. It wasn't unheard of. We'd had vandalism twice in my time there. I should go out and deal with it. I put on my coat, my boots, grabbed the flashlight. I opened the cottage door. The cold hit me like a wall. 20 degrees maybe. The snow from earlier in the week was still on the ground, thin but intact. I walked toward the old section. I kept my flashlight off. I don't know why exactly. It was an instinct. I didn't want whatever was out there to know I was coming. I wanted to see it before it saw me. I walked between the headstones in the dark, using the path lights for navigation, and when I got close enough to the spot where I'd seen the figure, I stopped. Nothing there. I turned the flashlight on. Empty space between 2 headstones. No footprints in the snow, or rather the snow there had been disturbed but not with footprints. With a wider, irregular mark, as if something had been dragged or pressed flat. And the ground was warm. I could feel it through the soles of my boots. I backed away from that spot and I went back to the cottage, and I did not go outside again that night. In the morning I called Gerald Fitch's office. He wasn't in. His assistant, a woman named Patricia who I'd spoken to a handful of times and who seemed like a sensible, kind person, took a message. He called back 3 days later. I told him about the temperature readings. I told him about the lights. I told him carefully about the figure I'd seen. There was a long silence on the line. "Caleb," he said finally, "I want you to listen to me carefully." I said I was listening. "Stay away from plot 37. I told him I already knew that he'd told me that on my first day, but that I needed to understand what was happening. Another silence. "Some things don't have explanations," he said, and I knew those words. I'd read them before. In the note from the coffee can. I asked him if he'd written that note. He said no. He said it so quickly and with such certainty that I believed him. Then he said, "Caleb, I'm not going to tell you what's in that grave. I don't think it would help you. But I am going to tell you that you are not the first person who has worked at Harrow Hill and found that grave noteworthy. And every one of those people was better off when they decided to let it be." I asked him what happened to the ones who didn't let it be. He said, "They didn't finish out their contracts." I thought about that for a long time after I hung up. He hadn't said they quit. He hadn't said they were fired. He'd said they didn't finish out their contracts. The dreams started in March. I want to describe them carefully because they were not like normal dreams. I've had vivid dreams before, everybody has. But these were different in a specific technical way that I've thought about a lot since. They had no narrative content. A normal dream has a structure, even if it's confused. There are events, sequences, things that happen. These dreams were just images. Single, static, precise images. Like photographs. The first one was just the grave. Plot 37 from about 3 feet away, shot at a slight downward angle. The headstone. The dark granite. Elias 4. And beneath the stone, barely visible because it was happening underground, a light, very faint, amber-colored, pulsing. I woke from this dream at 3 a.m. with absolute clarity about what I'd seen, which is not how dream recall usually works. I remembered it the way you remember a photograph you've actually seen, not the way you remember something that happened in your sleep. The second dream came the following night. A hand pressing upward against the inside of a wooden surface. Long fingers, very white, pressing steadily against the wood, not frantically, not hammering, just pressing. Testing. Learning the resistance. I woke at 3 a.m. The third dream was harder to look at even in memory. A face, very close, filling the frame of vision completely. Mel. Eyes closed. The skin yellow-white and waxy and perfect. Not the decomposed horror you might expect, but something almost preserved. Something that looked less like a dead face and more like a face that was waiting. The lips slightly parted. The nostrils slightly flared. Breathing in. I woke at 3 a.m. By the fourth night I was sleeping with the light on. By the fifth night I was barely sleeping at all. I looked terrible, sunken eyes, shaky hands, the gray-faced exhaustion of a man running on 3 hours of sleep and too much coffee. The sixth night I didn't have a dream. Instead, at 3 a.m. I heard something at the cottage door. Not knocking. Not the wind. Something at the door, a pressure against it like a hand pressed flat against the outside of the wood. The same pressure as the hand in the dream translated to the physical world. I lay in bed for a very long time without moving. Then I got up and I opened the door. Nothing there. But the temperature on the cottage porch, which I verified with the thermometer I now kept by the door, was 61 degrees. In March. At 3 a.m. With the ambient air at 26 degrees. 61. I closed the door. Locked it. Pushed a chair under the knob. Sat at the kitchen table until dawn. I want to talk for a moment about what prolonged exposure to something like this does to you psychologically, because I think it's important and I think a lot of people who haven't experienced it underestimate it. It doesn't make you crazy. That's the thing. You don't lose your mind. You don't start seeing things that aren't there or hearing voices or experiencing breaks with reality in any dramatic movie-style way. What happens is subtler and in some ways worse. You become unable to trust your own baseline. Everything that used to be neutral becomes potentially significant. The way a shadow falls. The temperature of a surface. The sound the wind makes between the headstones. Every one of these things, which I had previously processed and dismissed as environmental noise, was now a potential signal. A potential communication from something I didn't understand. And the problem with that, the real psychological damage of it, is that you can't stop. Once you start looking for patterns, you find them everywhere. Because patterns are everywhere. The human brain is a pattern recognition engine. It's what we evolved to do, and it does it constantly whether you ask it to or not. So I started seeing patterns everywhere in the cemetery, and not all of them were real, and I had no reliable way to distinguish the real ones from the ones my frightened brain was generating. Was that grave slightly closer to the path than it had been yesterday? Was that tree leaning at a different angle? Was that shadow, there between those two headstones, moving in a direction that didn't match the wind? I kept a journal. That was my coping mechanism. I wrote down everything I observed, with times and dates and as much objective descriptive detail as I could manage. The idea was that if I documented everything systematically, I could separate the patterns that repeated, the ones that had a real structure, from the noise. The journal helped and hurt in equal measure. It helped because it gave me something productive to do with the anxiety. It hurt because reading back through the entries made it impossible to maintain the comfortable fiction that there was nothing wrong. By mid-March, my journal had 40 entries about Plot 37 spanning 3 months. Temperature readings. Observations of ground disturbance. Occurrences of the scratching sound. Light anomalies. The figure. And what the journal showed, unambiguously, was that the phenomenon was intensifying. Not dramatically. Not in leaps. But steadily, progressively, relentlessly. The ground around Plot 37 was warmer now than it had been in November. The scratching sounds were more frequent and clearer. The lights failed more often. The settlement of the ground had continued. The depression around the headstone was now nearly 4 inches deep, clearly visible from 20 feet away. Something was happening. Something was building. And then my work brought me within 3 plots of 37. It was a burial in the old section, which was unusual. We rarely used the old section for new interments anymore, since the available plots were limited and expensive. But an elderly woman from a local family had bought a plot next to her husband's grave in the old section years ago, and she died in March, and her family wanted the burial there. The plot was designated OB34. 3 plots from 37. I prepped the grave over 2 days in the second week of March, and those 2 days were among the most uncomfortable of my time at Harrow Hill. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because of the pressure. That's the only word I have for it. Pressure. A physical sensation of it. Not pain, not discomfort exactly, but an awareness of force. like being deep underwater, except I was above ground in an open field. A sense of something pressing against the air around me, compressing it slightly. And it grew stronger the closer I worked to plot 37. I kept my back to it as much as possible. Kept my eyes on my work. Talked to myself constantly, a running commentary on what I was doing, what I needed, what came next. The sound of my own voice was grounding in a way I hadn't expected. But the second afternoon, while I was on my knees working on the border of the grave, I heard the scratching. In daylight. Clear, bright March daylight at 2:30 in the afternoon. I stopped. The scratching continued for perhaps 30 seconds. Not from underground, or not only from underground. It seemed to come from a direction which it never had before. Before it had just been sound, ambient, sourceless. Now I could track it. From plot 37. I looked up at the grave. Nothing visible. Nothing unusual. The headstone stood solid and dark in the afternoon light. But the depression in the ground was deeper than it had been yesterday. I was certain of it. Half an inch deeper maybe. Enough to notice. Like the ground had continued to settle while I wasn't watching. Like something inside was pushing up. I finished the burial preparation the next morning, and I was never so glad to complete a job in my life. I reported the settlement at plot 37 to Gerald Fitch in a brief, factual email, and then I went back to my cottage and I sat for a while trying to decide what to do. I was not a coward. I want to be clear about that. But I also wasn't foolish. I'd worked at Harrow Hill for nearly 5 months. I'd been told twice, once in person by my employer, once in writing by someone whose identity I didn't know, to leave plot 37 alone. Whatever was happening there was intensifying. And I had a choice. I could continue to observe and document and stay at a cautious distance. Or I could look closer. I told myself I'd give it 2 more weeks. That was a mistake. The April thaw came early and came hard. The ground softened quickly after the long hard freeze, and with it came the particular quality of spring in a cemetery, a rich, complex smell of earth and decay and new growth, the cycle of decomposition and emergence inseparable in that dark soil. It's a smell I'd gotten used to over the years. That spring, for the first time, it bothered me. Because in the old section it was different. The smell around plot 37 was wrong. Not stronger than the surrounding graves, not the dramatic stench of fresh decay that you'd get from a recently used plot. Something else. Something chemical and metallic and wrong, underneath the normal cemetery smell, like tasting copper in the back of your throat. Not obviously bad. Not the kind of smell that made you gag. Just wrong. Wrong in the specific way that our bodies know danger before our conscious minds do. I had started to carry the soil thermometer with me on my daily rounds, because the temperature readings had become one of the clearest data points in my journal. In early April, the reading at plot 37 was 67 degrees. The surrounding soil was averaging 44 degrees as the frost retreated. 67. And climbing. I called Gerald Fitch again on a Tuesday afternoon in early April, and I didn't ask permission this time. I told him what was happening. The temperatures. The smell. The depression in the ground, now deep enough to be a genuine tripping hazard, wide enough to encompass the entire footprint of the grave. He was quiet for a longer time than usual. Then he said, "I'm going to come out on Thursday." I said good. He came out Thursday. He was quiet and precise as always, wearing his brown cardigan, limping slightly. He walked out to plot 37 with me, and he stood at a respectful distance and looked at it for a long time. Then he said something I wasn't prepared for. "Have you been inside the administrative records?" The old records. I told him I had. I told him I'd found the entry for Elias Vore. Restricted in red ink. He nodded like this didn't surprise him. "There are things about that plot that I was told when I took this position," he said, "and things I was told not to share. I've respected those instructions for 20 years. I'm going to respect them now." He paused. "But I'm going to tell you this. The man in that grave was not an ordinary man, and the circumstances of his interment were not ordinary, and there are people who believe, who have always believed, that the interment itself was a containment. Not just a burial. A containment." I asked him what that meant. "It means," he said carefully, "that some people think he was placed there in such a way as to keep him in place. And that others believe over enough time, any containment fails." I stared at him. "Are you telling me," I said, "that someone put something in that grave, something other than a body, to hold him down?" "I'm telling you what some people believe," he said. "I'm not telling you it's true. But you think it might be." He looked at the grave for another long moment. Then he said, "I've worked at this cemetery for 23 years. I've seen that depression develop over my entire tenure. When I started, it wasn't visible at all. Now," He gestured at the sunken ground. Something is changing. What do we do? I asked. You leave it alone, he said. Same as I've been telling you since September. He drove away that afternoon and I stood at the edge of the old section and watched his car disappear down the gravel road, and I felt more alone than I had since arriving at Harrow Hill. That night the scratching was so loud I could hear it from the cottage. I'm going to tell you what happened next, and I need you to understand that I know how it sounds. It was the second week of April. A Thursday night, not long after midnight. I was awake. I was always awake at midnight by that point, my sleep having deteriorated to a reliable pattern of brief unconsciousness followed by sudden, complete wakefulness at between midnight and 1 a.m. The scratching had been going on for about 20 minutes. Steady, rhythmic, louder than any previous night. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my journal open and a cup of cold coffee in front of me, and I was writing down what I was hearing, and at some point the scratching stopped. And something else started. I don't want to call it a voice. It wasn't language. It wasn't anything I can fully translate into a description that will do it justice. But it was a sound made by something with intention, with will, directed outward from underground, through 30 feet of frozen and half-frozen earth, audible at a distance of, I'm estimating, perhaps 100 yards from where I sat in my kitchen. It was low. Below the range of music, closer to the bass rumble of distant thunder. But with a texture to it, irregular, patterned, rising and falling. The way speech sounds when you're listening to it through a wall. I didn't move for a very long time. Then I picked up my flashlight and my jacket and my boots and I went outside. I know. The night was clear and cold, just above freezing. No wind. The cemetery was very still, and the stars were extraordinary, the kind of visibility you only get in rural places far from ambient light, the Milky Way visible as a pale smear across the southern sky. I walked toward the old section. The sound was clearer outside, more present. And as I walked closer, as I moved between the headstones toward plot 37, it changed. Not in volume, but in character. It began to feel directed. I know that's a strange thing to say about a sound, but it stopped feeling like ambient noise and started feeling aimed. Like something was orienting toward me the way a searchlight orients, not hunting, not erratic, but deliberate. Where? I stopped about 15 feet from the grave. The depression in the ground was deeper than I'd seen it. Even in the dark I could see the shadow it cast. A visible bowl in the earth, 6 or 8 inches deep by my estimate, the grass at its edges pulling away from the sunken center. The headstone tilted slightly. Not dramatically. Not enough to fall. But tilted as if the soil beneath it had shifted. Nemo me impune laces sit, inclining slightly toward me. The sound was coming from directly below the surface of the grave. I took a step forward. And then the sound changed. It rose in pitch. Just barely. Just enough. And for one moment, one specific moment that I will remember with absolute clarity for the rest of my life, it coalesced into something that was almost a word. Not a word I recognized. Not English, not any language I knew. But a word. A shape, in sound, that carried meaning the way a word carries meaning. Not translated, not understood intellectually, but felt. Landing in the chest the way music lands. What it felt like was, still here. I ran. I'm not ashamed of that. I ran back to the cottage and I locked the door and I pushed the chair under the knob and I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and I didn't move until the sun came up. In the morning, I called my sister in Ohio and told her that I was thinking about leaving my job. She said, "Caleb, I've been waiting for you to say that for 6 months. I should have left." I know that. The practical truth is that I didn't leave for reasons that seem inadequate now but felt pressing at the time. I had nowhere to go, the job came with housing, I was 6 months away from what would have been the longest sustained period of employment in my adult life, and on some level, the level I didn't like to examine too closely, I didn't want to give in to something I still believed I might be able to explain. But there was something else. The night after I heard the voice, after I ran back to the cottage, I found something at the base of my door. Not inside the cottage. Outside. On the porch. A small pile of dark soil. Fine-grained, almost powdery. A handful of it, arranged in an almost deliberate oval shape on the welcome mat. The kind of soil you find 6 feet down. The kind of soil that comes from a grave. I stared at it for a long time. Then I got the soil thermometer. 63 degrees. I swept it off the porch with a broom and I didn't touch it with my hands, and then I stood at the cottage door for a while just breathing and trying to decide. I decided, 2 more weeks. I would give myself 2 more weeks to document what was happening, and if it continued to escalate I would tell Gerald Fitch I needed to resign. And if he wouldn't let me resign, I would walk away from the job and the housing and every practical consideration and just drive away from Harrow Hill and never come back. That was the plan. The plan lasted 6 days. Because on the 6th day I found the handprint. It was on the inner surface of the cottage window, the window facing the old section. The window I looked through most often watching the cemetery at night. On the inside, a handprint in that same dark soil on the inner surface of the glass. Someone had been inside the cottage. Or something had. And whatever had been inside had stood at my window and pressed its hand against it and looked out, or looked in, or both, and then left without disturbing the locked door or the locked windows or any other point of entry I could find. I stood looking at that handprint for a very long time. Then I took a photograph of it, added it to the journal, cleaned it off, and then I did the thing I'd told myself I wouldn't do. I went out to plot 37 in the middle of the day with my shovel, and I started to dig. I want to be precise about what I was doing because I've thought about it a lot and I understand now that it was exactly the right thing and exactly the wrong thing simultaneously. I wasn't trying to open the grave. That wasn't my intention. My intention was to dig down a few inches, enough to understand the source of the thermal anomaly, enough to find out if something physical was causing the temperature differential, and then fill the hole back in and have information. That was my plan. The shovel went in easily. Too easily. The soil, which should have been compact, year-settled earth, was soft and loose in a way that felt recently turned. Like a garden bed that's been worked in the past week. Like something had disturbed it. From below. I dug for 10 minutes, carefully setting the soil to one side. I was down about 8 inches when the smell hit me. Not the wrong metallic smell I'd noticed before. Something different, something older and stranger. Chemical in character but organic somehow, like industrial solvent mixed with something biological, something alive. It was not a smell of decay. Decay I knew. This was something else. Something I had no framework for. I kept digging. At 14 inches I found the first sign of the coffin. Not the coffin itself. A layer of material above it, and this is the thing that stopped me cold because it wasn't natural earth. It was something that had been placed there intentionally. A layer of material 6 to 8 inches thick, distributed across the top of the casket. I crouched down and looked at it closely. Salt. And something else mixed with the salt, what looked like herbs dried and crumbled with age, and something darker and more particulate that I couldn't immediately identify. Salt. Placed over a coffin. In a thick, deliberate layer. Like a seal. I sat back on my heels and looked at what I'd uncovered, and I thought about what Gerald Fitch had said. A containment. Not just a burial. A containment. I thought about the note in the coffee can. Whatever happens at that plot, you walk away from it. I thought about the handprint on my window. I should have filled the hole back in. I know. But I looked at that layer of salt and herbs, at this thing that someone had done with deliberate intention over 80 years ago, and I needed to know if it was intact. Because if the containment was failing, if whatever was meant to hold Elias Vore in place was degrading or dissolving, then I needed to know the extent of it. I needed to understand how far along the process was. Not for my own peace of mind, but because if the containment was failing, someone needed to know. Someone with more authority and more knowledge than a groundskeeper with a journal and a soil thermometer. I reached down and pressed my hand flat against the salt layer. And the scratching started. Right beneath my hand. Right there, through 6 inches of salt and herbs and 8 inches of soil, from inside the coffin below, something was scratching at the wood. Not slow. Not exploratory. Fast. Urgent. The way a trapped animal scratches. The way something that knew it had been found scratches. I pulled my hand back and the scratching stopped. A complete instant silence. Then from below that low sound again. That not quite a word. Rising through the earth, through the salt, through the loose soil, into the air above the grave. And my name. My name was in it. Not clearly. Not spoken like you or I would speak it. But recognizable. A sound that carried the same quality as my name, that shaped itself in the particular way the letters of my name would shape it. Gulp. Close enough to unmistakable. I was out of that grave in under 2 seconds. I grabbed my shovel and I walked, not ran, walked because I was holding myself very carefully together, back to the cottage, and I did not look behind me. I filled the hole the next morning. Tamped the soil as flat as I could get it, smoothed everything out. But I knew it didn't matter. The salt layer was disturbed now. Whatever it had been sealing in, I had opened a breach. Things moved faster after that. The dreams were gone, replaced by something worse. I'd lie down and close my eyes and see that face again, the one from the third dream, but now it was closer. Much closer. And the eyes were open. Yellow-gray. Ancient. Patient. Looking at me with an expression I can only describe as recognition. I stopped lying down. I slept in the kitchen chair when I slept at all, which was rarely, and I left every light in the cottage on. The soil was back on my porch the next morning. Twice as much as before, arranged in the same oval pattern. The night after that, I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, unhurried footsteps. Crossing the porch from the cemetery side to the door, then stopping. Then the door handle turned. I had the deadbolt locked and the chain on and the chair under the knob, and none of those things moved, and after a moment the handle was still again. I sat in the kitchen for the rest of that night holding a flashlight in both hands like it was a weapon. In the morning I found something on the outside of the door. Letters traced in soil on the wood. They didn't spell anything I recognized. Not English. Not any alphabet I knew. But below them, in a different kind of mark, a deeper impression like a finger pressed hard, was something I did recognize. The number 37. I took a photograph. I called Gerald Fitch. He didn't answer. I left a message that I kept deliberately calm, describing what I'd found, asking him to call me back urgently. He called back the following morning. "I'm coming out today," he said. "Don't go near the grave." He arrived at 2 in the afternoon, looked at the door, looked at the photograph I showed him, looked at me, at my face, at the obvious physical deterioration of a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "You dug?" he said. It wasn't a question. I said yes. He sat down at my kitchen table and put his face in his hands for a moment. Then he said, "You broke the seal." I said I knew. The salt was from 1943. It was placed there by a man who knew what he was doing. A man who had spent a long time understanding what Elias Vore was and what it would take to keep him contained. That seal has been weakening for decades. The temperature, the settlement, the sounds, all of that has been the weakening of the seal. And now you've... He stopped. "What?" I said. "Now I've what?" "Now there's an opening," he said. "Even a small one. That's all that was needed." I asked him what we were supposed to do. He said, "I'm going to make some calls." He made the calls from his car, which I found significant. He didn't want me to hear them. He sat out there for 45 minutes. Then he came back in. "There's a woman," he said, "who has been waiting for this for a long time. She's old and she's far away, and getting her here will take 2 days. Until she arrives, I want you to stay inside. Leave every light on. Don't respond to anything you hear." I said, "Gerald, who is this woman?" He said, "Someone who knows about Elias Vore." I said, "What is Elias Vore?" He looked at me for a moment. "Something," he said, "that should have died in 1943. Then he left. I want to describe those 2 days as clearly as I can, because they were the longest and the worst of my life up to that point. I stayed inside. I left every light on. I didn't go near the grave. The sounds were continuous. Not the scratching, specifically, that had changed in character. What I heard now was more complex, more varied. The scratching was still there, but beneath it was that low, resonant sound, the voice, and above it, occasionally, something else. A rhythmic thumping that I recognized, with a sick lurch of understanding, as something striking the inside of a wooden surface. Something knocking against the lid of a coffin. Not frantically, steadily, patiently. Like something that had been doing this for a long time and was not going to stop. On the first night, I saw the figure again. Not at a distance this time. At my cottage window. Standing directly outside the glass, looking in. I've described it before as human in shape. Up close it was less certain. The proportions were wrong in ways I couldn't specify. Too tall, perhaps, or the limbs arranged slightly incorrectly, or the way it stood in a way that suggested it had been still for a very long time and found the condition more natural than movement. It had no face that I could discern in the dark. But it had eyes. Not visible, I couldn't have described them if I tried. But present. Aimed at me through the glass with a focused precision that I felt physically, in my sternum, like a finger pressed against the center of my chest. I looked at it. It looked at me. For perhaps 3 minutes. Then it was gone. Not gone like it moved away, gone like a flame going out. There one moment, absent the next. The soil on my porch the next morning was in the shape of a hand. 5 fingers splayed, palm at the center, pointing toward my door. I didn't clean it up this time. I photographed it and left it. On the second day, the lights in the old section went out completely. Not flickering. Every single path light, from the entrance of the old section to the far edge, all at once, at 11:47 p.m. The only light in that part of the cemetery was a dull, amber-colored glow coming from below the surface of the ground. From plot 37. I could see it from the cottage window. A warm, pulsing light, barely visible, rising through the soil, through the broken seal I had opened, and casting a faint illumination on the underside of the depression above the grave. A light from underground. I watched it for a long time. It pulsed in the same rhythm as the thumping. The same rhythm as the scratching had established weeks ago. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Like a heartbeat. Like something alive. Her name was Dora Silva. She was 84 years old. She arrived in a car driven by a young man who was, I think, her grandson, who helped her out of the passenger seat and then stood by the car looking deeply uncomfortable while she walked toward me without assistance, moving with the particular careful deliberateness of very old people whose bodies are unreliable but whose minds are not. She was small, under 5 feet, white hair in a tight bun, dark eyes that were still completely sharp, taking in the cemetery, the cottage, me with rapid, assessing precision. She shook my hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "You're the one who dug," she said. Not as an accusation, as a statement. I said yes. She said, "That was both foolish and in the end probably necessary. Where's the grave?" I led her to plot 37. Gerald Fitch walked on her other side, and I noticed he stayed half a step behind her the entire time, which told me something about how he related to her authority. She stood at the edge of the depression for a long time looking at it. The amber glow from underground was invisible in the afternoon light. But the smell was there, the wrong metallic smell, and the air above the grave had that dense, pressurized quality I'd been feeling for months. Dora Silva breathed it in like she was assessing a wine. "It's significantly further along than I expected," she said. Gerald said, "It's been deteriorating for years." "I know," she said. "We should have addressed it years ago. We kept thinking there was more time." She looked at me. "Do you know who Elias Vore was?" I said I'd found some things. She said, "Then let me tell you what you didn't find." We went back to the cottage. The three of us sat at my kitchen table. Dora Silva drank tea. Gerald Fitch sat with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the surface, like a man in church. She talked for a long time. Elias Vore was born in 1891 in rural Connecticut. He was the youngest son of a wealthy family with a long history of, she chose her words with evident care, unusual practices. Things that predated modern categories. Things that didn't fit neatly into any tradition she could name. Vore was, by all accounts, extremely intelligent and deeply isolated and possessed of a quality that she described as will. A singular, focused will that exceeded normal human capacity. Not in any romantic sense. Not like the force of personality we mean when we say someone has a strong will. Something more literal. A capacity to make things happen through directed intention. Things that didn't have mechanical explanations. What kind of things? I asked. He could make things stop, she said. People who angered him found that aspects of their lives simply stopped. Equipment failed. Crops died. Relationships collapsed. Health deteriorated. Without any apparent cause. And when they died? I said, remembering what I'd read in the history book. 3 people who antagonized him. She looked at me steadily. Yes. How does someone end up in a sealed grave? I asked. The same way you contain anything dangerous, she said. You find people with the knowledge and the courage to do it, and you do it at the right moment. Vore was already dying in November of 1943, genuinely dying of cardiac failure as the records show. But dying and gone are not always the same thing. The people who understood what he was made preparations. The salt, the herbs, the specific placement of the body, certain arrangements within the casket that I'm not going to describe. All designed to contain what Vore was, not his body but what he was, within the grave. His soul. I said, and it felt like a strange thing to say. Call it what you like, she said. I don't use that word because I don't think it's accurate. Whatever animates a human being, the specific quality of will and intent that makes you rather than just a collection of biological processes, Vore's version of that was unusual. Powerful. Not something that simply dissipated with the death of his body. The seal was designed to bind it to the physical location of the grave. For how long? She was quiet for a moment. Indefinitely, theoretically. But practical experience has shown us that these things degrade. She looked at Gerald. How long have you been aware of the anomalies? He said, the temperature differential was first noted in the records about 15 years ago. I've been aware of it personally for about 10. And you waited 10 years, she said. Not angry, resigned. The protocol said. I know what the protocol said. She looked back at me. When you broke through the salt layer, you created a pathway. A breach in the containment. The interval between that breach and a full failure is variable. But we're looking at days, not weeks. Full failure meaning what? I asked. She held my gaze for a moment. "Meaning whatever is in that grave gets out," she said. Silence. "Can you reseal it?" I asked. "We're going to try," she said. "Tonight." What followed was the strangest afternoon of my life. Dora Silva's grandson, who turned out to be an extremely competent young man of about 30 named Marcus, who clearly had been in situations like this before, or adjacent to them, retrieved a series of bags and cases from the car while Dora briefed Gerald and me on what was going to happen. The plan was a resealing. Using materials that Dora had brought with her, she didn't explain what most of them were, and I had the strong impression that detailed questions were not welcome. They would open the grave sufficiently to access the existing salt layer, repair the breach I'd created, add fresh material to reinforce what was already there, and lose the grave. "Will it hold?" Gerald asked. "It'll buy us time," she said. "A year, maybe 2. Long enough to make proper arrangements." She didn't explain what proper arrangements meant, and I didn't ask. While Dora and Marcus made their preparations, I dug. That's what they needed from me. The physical labor of opening the grave to the appropriate depth, enough to access the salt layer, repair and reinforce it, and then close everything back up. I was a gravedigger. That was my function. It was late afternoon, getting toward 5 o'clock, when I took my shovel out to plot 37. The amber glow from underground was visible now even in daylight. Just barely, just a faint warmth from below the surface of the depression, but visible if you were looking for it. The pressure in the air around the grave was intense. Physical, oppressive, like wading into thick water. Every step toward the headstone required an active decision, an effort of will. I dug. The soil was soft and loose all the way down, softer than even I'd prepared for, and I'd known it was disturbed. The hole came easily and I set the dirt in careful piles to one side. At about 10 inches I hit the salt layer. It was worse than I'd expected. The breach I'd created 2 days ago had expanded. Not just where I'd pressed my hand, the whole layer had shifted and settled in my absence, the careful distribution disrupted by whatever pressure was coming from below. The salt was still there, but it was patchy now, thin in some places, absent entirely in others. And through the thinnest places that amber light seeped upward. Not bright. Not like sunlight. The warm, reddish amber of deep burning embers. And warm, physically warm, the way the air around a fire is warm, radiating upward from beneath the salt layer. I crouched at the edge of the hole and looked down at it. The scratching started. And the light pulsed. And from below, that sound, that low resonant sound that had taken my name and placed it in itself, began again. But this time it didn't sound like distance. It sounded close. Dora Silva and Marcus arrived at the grave just as the light was failing. She had changed her clothes. She was wearing dark, plain things, nothing ceremonial, nothing theatrical. And she was carrying a bag that she set down at the edge of the hole without explanation. She looked at the breach in the salt layer. She looked at the light coming from below. Her expression was controlled in the specific way of someone who has prepared very carefully for something and is now deciding whether the preparation was adequate. "It's further gone than I thought it would be," she said quietly. To herself, I think, rather than to any of us. Marcus set up lanterns, battery-powered, directed downward into the grave. Gerald Fitch stood at a distance of about 20 feet with his hands in his pockets, watching. He'd been very quiet for the last hour. Dora began her work. I'm going to be limited in what I describe here, partly because I don't fully understand what I was watching and partly because she asked me afterward to be discreet about the specifics. What I can tell you is that it involved the materials from her bag, the salt and herbs and darker substances I'd seen traces of before, introduced carefully into the breach in the existing layer. She worked with focused precision, kneeling at the edge of the hole, reaching down to distribute the material. And the sound from below changed as she worked. It got louder. The amber glow intensified. The pressure in the air, that dense, compressive quality, became almost unbearable. I had to actively work to breathe, which sounds dramatic but is what I experienced. Like breathing at high altitude. My chest muscles working consciously at something that's supposed to be automatic. And then something happened that I was not prepared for, despite everything. The lid of the coffin moved. 6 feet below the surface of the soil. Below the disturbed earth and the salt layer and the lantern light in Dora's careful hands. The lid moved. Not opened. Not flying apart dramatically. Just shifted. A slight, grinding movement like something pushing against it from the inside. The wood, old 80-year-old wood, creaking with the pressure of something pressing outward. Marcus said very quietly, "Dora?" She said, "I know. Keep going." She kept working. The scratching from below was frantic now, Not the patient, testing quality of before, but urgent, rapid, the sound of something that was aware that the opportunity it had been creating for itself was being closed. The amber light pulsed in rapid, irregular flashes. The lid shifted again. More significantly this time. A gap appeared at one edge, barely an inch, maybe less. Barely visible in the lantern light. But from that gap, the amber light poured upward in a thin, bright column. And with it, the smell, not the wrong metallic smell I'd been living with for months, but something far more concentrated, far more overwhelming. Something that had no name in my experience. Something that bypassed language entirely and landed directly in the oldest part of my brain, the part that doesn't think, just reacts. I took 3 steps backward. The column of light hit the underside of Dora's hand as she reached into the grave. She made a sound I will never forget. Not a scream. Controlled. But involuntary, a sharp, high, bitten-off sound. Pain and something worse than pain. She kept working. The lid shifted for a 3rd time. And then she was done. She sat back from the edge of the hole and exhaled a long, slow breath, and Marcus was beside her immediately, looking at her hand, and she waved him off. The amber light was gone. The scratching had stopped. The pressure in the air eased so suddenly and so completely that I almost fell, the way you do when you've been leaning hard against something and it suddenly gives. The salt layer was restored. She'd done it. We closed the grave. I told you earlier that I would give myself 2 more weeks and then leave if things hadn't resolved. The resealing happened on April 14th. I gave my notice to Gerald Fitch on April 15th. He accepted it without argument. He looked, if I'm honest, relieved and exhausted and slightly guilty, which I understood. He'd hired me without telling me what I was being hired into proximity with. I didn't hold it against him. I don't think he fully understood what was there either. My last day at Harrow Hill Cemetery was April 30th. Dora Silva was there for my last mourning. She'd stayed in a motel nearby for the 2 weeks following the resealing, monitoring, checking the temperature at plot 37 daily, walking the old section each evening. The readings had normalized. 61 degrees had dropped to 52, then 48, then 44. Getting there. Not fully normalized, but trending in the right direction. She sat with me over coffee on that last morning and told me a few things she hadn't told me before. She told me that she'd been aware of plot 37 since she was in her 30s. That there was a small group of people, how many she didn't say, who had maintained awareness of it over the decades. That she was the last of the ones who fully understood what VOR had been and what the containment required. What happens when you're gone? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. We're trying to find someone to pass this to, she said. Someone with the knowledge and the disposition for it. How much time do you think the resealing bought? She looked out the window toward the old section. A year, she said. Maybe a little more. The original containment was more robust. This one, she paused. VOR is stronger than he was in 1943. Whatever he is now, after 80 years in that grave, he's more than he was. More? I said. Death doesn't diminish some things, she said. Sometimes it concentrates them. I thought about that. The handprint, I said. On my window. Inside. She nodded. How? 80 years of intent, she said. The breach you created. His reach has been extending for years, slowly limited. You gave him more range. She paused. The soil on your porch. Your name in the voice. He was learning you. Learning me. When something old and purposeful becomes aware of a specific person, she said carefully, it tends to focus on them. Whatever you did by digging, by making contact, you're known to him now. You should be aware of that. I asked what that meant practically. She said, it means you should pay attention. She said it calmly, like she was giving me gardening advice. I left Harrow Hill that afternoon with my 2 bags and my journal and the note from the coffee can, and I drove away from that narrow gravel road for the last time. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. That was 6 years ago. I've moved twice since then. I work in landscaping now. Outdoor work, I seem to need that, but as far from cemeteries as I can manage. For the first year after Harrow Hill I was fine. Not good, necessarily, but fine. Sleeping regularly, working steadily, beginning, slowly, to file what had happened at Harrow Hill into a category that felt manageable. Extraordinary experience. Not something I needed to understand fully, just something I'd survived. Then things started happening. Small things. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could not, in isolation, be rationalized. The temperature in a room I've just walked into dropping by 10 degrees, then normalizing when I check with a thermometer. A particular quality to shadows in certain spaces. A density, a texture that lingers just at the edge of what I can point to and name. The sound of something beneath the floor of my apartment, irregular, patient. coming from the direction of the slab. My dreams, which had stopped after I left Harrow Hill, started again. The same face, closer than before. Eyes open. Looking at me with that expression I still can't fully name. Not malice exactly, not fury. Something more considered than that. Something that takes the long view. Something that has been waiting since 1943 and knows that waiting is not the same as losing. 3 months ago, I found soil on my apartment porch. Fine-grained, dark, powdery. I tested the temperature. 61 degrees. I called the number Dora Silva had left me. A recording. A voice that wasn't hers. A message that had clearly been recorded before she died. I don't know when she died, only that the voice was past tense about itself somehow, speaking in the way of someone recording their last instructions. It gave me the name of Marcus, who had been at Harrow Hill that night. A number for him. Marcus answered on the third ring. I told him what was happening. There was a long silence. Then he said, "I was afraid of this." I asked him what was happening. He said, "The resealing is failing. Faster than expected. We've been monitoring Harrow Hill remotely and the temperature readings are back to where they were in April 2019. Maybe worse." I said, "Marcus, he knows where I am. I moved twice and he knows where I am." Another silence. "That's why I was afraid of this," Marcus said. "Once something like VOR focuses on a person, how do I stop it?" He was quiet for a while. "There's one option," he said. "But you're not going to like it." I asked what it was. "You go back," he said. "Before the seal fails completely. Because if it fails completely, we lose control of where he goes. But if we reseal it while part of him is still there, we have a chance to do it properly. More robustly than Dora's work. With what we know now." "Go back to Harrow Hill," I said. "Yes." "To plot 37. "Yes." "And do what?" He told me. I listened to all of it. And then I said I'd think about it. That was 3 weeks ago. In the time since, the soil has appeared on my porch twice more. The temperature in my bedroom dropped to 58 degrees last Thursday at 3 a.m., for no mechanical reason I could find. And 4 nights ago I heard scratching. From beneath my apartment floor. Dry, patient, persistent. The same sound I heard at Harrow Hill for months. The same rhythm. The same impossible presence, transmitted across whatever distance and through whatever medium, because something that has learned your name and found your location doesn't need to be physically close to reach you. Because it's not physical. Not anymore. Not fully. Last night I sat at my kitchen table and looked at my phone for a long time. Marcus's number is the last call in my outgoing list. I thought about what he told me. What the option was. What going back meant. I thought about Dora Silva's hand going into that grave in the failing light. The sound she'd made. I thought about that face in my dreams. The eyes. The patience. I thought about what she'd said. Death doesn't diminish some things. Sometimes it concentrates them. 83 years now. 83 years of concentration. My bags are packed. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. If you're reading this, or hearing this, and you're a person who has worked in a cemetery, or who has had any professional interaction with whatever remains at Harrow Hill Cemetery in rural western Pennsylvania, I want you to know 2 things. First, the note in the coffee can is true. I can confirm it. Whatever happens at that plot, you walk away from it. Second, sometimes you can't. Sometimes it follows you. And sometimes, though I'm only beginning to understand this, sometimes the fact that it followed you isn't incidental. Sometimes a thing like Elias VOR, a thing that's been gathering itself in the dark for 8 decades, picks someone for a reason. I don't know what that reason is. I'm going to find out tomorrow. I'll try to update this if I'm able. If I'm not, well, you can draw your own conclusions about that. But I'll tell you one last thing that I haven't told anyone else. Something that Marcus said at the end of our last call, almost as an afterthought, in the tone of a man trying to be reassuring and not fully managing it. He said, "Caleb, the one thing you have going for you is this. Whatever VOR has become, he's not free yet. He's still in there. Mostly. And anything that's still contained can still be sealed." I said, "Marcus, what's the other part?" He said, "What?" I said, "You said mostly. You said he's still in there mostly. What's the other part?" Silence. Then he said, "We're working on understanding that." And that was the last thing he said before I ended the call. I think about that word a lot. Mostly. The soil was on the porch again this morning. 61 degrees. The shape it was in, I hadn't seen this arrangement before. It wasn't a hand this time. It wasn't a word. It was the number 37. I leave in 4 hours. Whatever happens, leave the lights on. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. We upload stories like this every day, Long, real, and told by the people who lived them. No embellishment. No safety nets. Just the dark and the things that live in it. Sleep well.